There is something different about tournament mornings. The air is still, the gear's quiet, and before the first clay is thrown, there's this tension. This just isn't another round of sporting clays. This is the Canadian Open. Shot over 4 days, there's 700 possible targets that you can shoot. There's a main event that features 200 bird courses, a 50 clay super sporting course, there's a fit-ass competition, 5-stand event, make or break event, and sub-gauge competitions with a 100 bird prelim event on the Thursday and Friday before the main. There is no shortage of targets to hit or events to watch in your spare time. Now, unfortunately, my schedule did not allow me to shoot all 4 days, but I was able to get out on the Saturday and Sunday to shoot the main event. So first up on Saturday was the Cesar Guarini course, which featured a lot of rolling hills and wooded areas, which the course setters used to their advantage. This weekend is all about good shooting, good people, and a whole lot of crushed clays. Let's get after it. Alright, now my squad kicked the day off on stand 11, which featured 2 going away trap style targets, which I felt pretty confident I could break. I knew the rhythm was important to break them, so I needed to get on the first bird in good time and kill it quickly, but then take a breath, track the second bird for a second, and then kill the target. I managed to run this station despite my starting nerves, and it set the tone nicely for the next station. Alright, then we moved on to stand 12, which brought a different challenge. It was a report pair with a lime green uphill crossing target, followed by a standard teal. The first target just needed a confident move with good lead. The teal required you to wait until it broke up over the tree, then pull the trigger just as it stalled. I made the mistake of trying to be too perfect on the crosser, and I ended up shooting over top. I let it slip under my gun. A small error, but it reminded me that confidence usually beats precision, a lesson I still haven't learned. That lesson came into sharper focus on stand 13, where I walked into 2 gentle incomers thinking they were a given, but I got lulled into waiting for the targets to get closer. I dropped the first target and nearly dropped the next 3, but thankfully I chipped the second pair and pulled it together for the last pair.
Put on, bro. Put on.
Chipping them.
Don't worry about that. It don't matter.
If I could do it over again, I would have been more confident and attacked the first bird before it peaked, which would have given me more time with the second. Now, after a bit of a mental reset, I went into stand 14 thinking I need to be a little bit more confident, even if I missed the birds. I had 2 crossing targets, one from the left, one from the right, that looked fairly simple, but the thing you needed to pay attention to was the terrain. A quick look from about 30 feet back revealed just how much the terrain was rolling. So the trick here was you need to make sure that your gun was well beneath the birds when you pulled the trigger. If you were a little bit high, you would shoot over top very easily. So I made sure not to let the birds get underneath my pattern, and I was able to run this station, which was a good feeling after the slip-ups on the last stand. Alright, now that confidence carried into stand 15, which turned out to be one of the most intimidating looking report pairs on the course. We had 2 chandelles. First, a fast downhill target that required maximum confidence and aggression. Then a big right-to-right looper that came from beneath the hill and drifted even further out. The look of it alone was enough to instill doubt, but I stuck to my plan, and somehow, maybe through the will of the gods, I was able to string 3 pairs together. That high off the last stand quickly gave way to frustration at stand 16. There was a 50-yard Batu crossing target that came from the right to the left, one I have shot before. However, this one was a little farther out than I realized at the time, and when I shot it, I didn't give it enough lead. I caught a chip off of it the one time, which told me I was close, but I kept repeating the same mistake, hoping for a different result. The lesson learned here: don't be afraid to try something new after a miss, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Doing the same thing 4 times in a row, you'll likely end up with the same outcome. The only silver lining in the whole thing is I did do something 4 times consistently, but it was consistently wrong. That brought us around to stand 1, and the course setters were clearly having fun with this one. The targets were framed perfectly within the trees. We had a right to left crosser that dissected the treetops, and you couldn't pick it up, or at least I had a difficult time picking it up until it came out of the trees on the left-hand side, followed by a second bird that was springing really hard through a tight gap.
Dead. Got that one.
Another reminder that I need more practice shooting around obstacles, and maybe a reminder of the phrase, there are no trees in sporting clays. The obstacle-themed stands continued at stands 2, which offered a rabu, fired like a teal, followed by a quartering away target that left you again shooting through tight windows between trees. I had a good grasp on this pair, and I felt really good about it until I slipped my hold point down on the last bird that pushed my gun high and offline when it came time to shoot. A seemingly small mistake, but as you know, limiting small mistakes is how you build a scorecard. Moving to stand 3, I repeated the same bad habit. This station looked like a gimme, and I told myself to give it the respect that it deserved, but again, I made a mistake. I dropped my hold point a little bit too low, which allowed me to develop too much gun speed, and it pushed my gun up high when it timed to pull the trigger. The background and lighting made reading these targets tough, but a miss is a miss, and it was a good set station. This would be one that I would go back to practice, solely for the fact that it looked like such an easy pair, and it was probably my worst stand of the course. All right, now moving into stand 4, I told myself that I needed to regroup and get back to making a solid plan. This station featured a high left to right crossing standard target, followed by a looping chandelle. Both targets looked reasonable and I felt confident I could break them. I got cautious on the last looper, and that caution pushed me offline, but still, a better mental approach.
Very nice.
For stand 5, we entered a heavily wooded section of the course. Luckily, I had a set of lighter glasses with me, which brightened up the targets for this station, but we had a quartering incomer followed by a right to left crosser. Both targets didn't have a whole lot of spring on them. My plan was to let the first bird get nice and close, which set me up nicely on my hold point for the second bird. However, the first bird, I didn't take into consideration that there was a tree there that got in my head, and it slowed my gun speed down, and I ended up missing the first bird behind it. So I moved my hold point and break point back, and that fixed it, and I was able to run the rest of the station. All right, for stand 6, we were back in the daylight, and we had a trap style target that had a lot of spring on it, followed by a teal target that you could not see until it broke the horizon. Now, I made some silly mistakes here. I shot over top of one of the trap targets for no particular reason, and the last teal did not reach the altitude that the last two teal targets did, and I rushed the shot. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have pulled the trigger and just called a no bird on that one because it was so much lower than the other ones. But hindsight is 20/20, and I chalked it up to life experience, and let's move on. All right, we're gonna just do an A and then another A. We'll just see A first. All right, by the time we got to stand 7, the heat was really starting to wick up and silly mistakes were starting to seep in. I made the mistake of mismounting my gun on the first bird because I thought a low gun approach would allow me to not measure the lead required for that target. But I was able to break the second target all 3 times because I recognized it from an earlier station. It was a very similar target to that from stand 3, and I knew that light hands, making sure that I didn't shoot over the target, would equal good results. So I cleaned things up after that, and I was able to straight the rest of the station. Then we came to stand 8, and if I'm honest, stand 8 looked like a bit of a monster if you weren't paying attention. First target looked like this target that required this enormous amount of lead, followed by this big gentle incomer that would lull you into measuring it and missing behind. But if you realize that the first target was a midi, you just needed to get at it and treat it like a trap target, and it would break. My mistake was on the incomer. I got lulled into measuring the lead and I missed it behind, but again, it was hot. With 2 more stations to go, we moved into stand 9, which ended up being one of my favorite stations of the day. We had the standard target come ripping downhill from left to right that linked up perfectly into a hold point for this uphill crosser. My only regret was not realizing the lead that the second bird needed sooner. It took a squad mate whispering, "Give it more," in the background until I finally had the confidence to push out in front until I felt uncomfortable, and I pulled the trigger and it broke. It was a great way to end that station.
More.
And finally, after all the heat, we reached stand 10. A true pair of incomers flying in formation and showing you lots of belly before disappearing into the meadow below. The wind made every pair slightly different, so it was hard to predict which bird would drop in first. When I stepped into the box, I let the first bird beat me while trying to track both birds at once, but I reset. I told myself, just kill the lead bird, only think about the second one once the first is gone. That shift in mindset worked, and I was able to finish strong and break the rest of the station.
Nice.
Day 1 wrapped, it had a little bit of everything. It had momentum, stumbles, frustration, and I felt like some real wins. It was a true test of patience and focus, but I left the course sweaty, humbled, and I was ready to do it all over again the next day. So stay tuned for day 2. It gets nasty.